Hello and welcome to Revive Your Soul. In this video I want to talk about the damage trauma bonding has on your brain. As in previous videos, I've talked about bonds and how they're created. They're created for security, for preservation, for survival. And we create these bonds with our parents and our caregivers or the people that are close to us. And we turn to them when our safety is threatened for protection and security. Trauma bonds are one of the reasons it is so hard to recover from these relationships, and it's the trauma bonding that holds you in the pattern of believing this is all your fault and makes it very hard and painful to recover from. The term was developed by Patrick Carnes, and he describes it as the misuse of fear, excitement, sexual feelings and sexual physiology to entangle another person. Bonding happens in all sorts of relationships, all types of relationships, and it's why it's used in communities, in the workplace, where they have team building exercises. It's to create the bonds of trust. In a toxic and emotionally abusive relationship, it's used for power and control. You have no idea that you're in an abusive relationship until you're out of it. And whilst you're in there, you're turning to your abuser believing they're going to protect you. People who have been through traumatic situations together create a unique bond. It's a very strong connection. It strengthens when we spend time together, when we develop trust for one another. And the reason it's so easy for them to walk away where you're left in pain is because they don't bond. It causes so much damage. Long-term contact with a toxic or emotionally abusive person causes damage to your brain, to the hippocampus. It's the shape of a seahorse and it just sits either side of the brain, around the ears, and we use this area for memory and learning. Damage to the hippocampus can result in memory loss, and the stress caused by the emotionally abusive or toxic relationship triggers the hormones cortisol, adrenaline and noradrenaline, and this causes the hippocampus to shrink. This can happen as a child or an adult who's coming under constant threat from intimidating or bullying behaviour. This could be the fear of abandonment. It could be the destruction of a favourite thing or toy. And the damage can happen when a child or an adult experiences belittling behaviour, name calling, criticism, yelling, swearing, verbal humiliation. It can happen when children and adults are isolated from their friends and family or preventing them from attending classes or groups. There was research done from Yale and Stanford University where they used veterans and victims of child abuse who were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. They used an MRI scan and they were able to see the reduction in the hippocampus. These studies showed that traumatic or highly stressful experiences can have long-term effects on the brain. When we're stressed, cortisol is released into the body and that causes the fight-flight response. According to New York University, high levels of cortisol can cause damage to the cells in the hippocampus. During the love bombing stage, you received a cocktail of hormones, and one of those was oxytocin. Oxytocin is a bonding hormone. It's also known as the cuddle hormone or the love hormone, as it's released when we bond with people. It can also be released when we're playing with a pet. It plays a huge role in pregnancy and in birth and in the bonding between the mother and the baby. Oxytocin eases stress. It creates a feeling of calm and closeness. In love relationships, your brain releases oxytocin when you're cuddling or making love. It's released when somebody shows trust in you, and it's released by just talking to people. So these strong bonds were created early on in the relationship. They were one-sided. They didn't bond with you, you bonded with them. This manufactured love, this cocktail of hormones. So when they started devaluing you, it caused you pain and confusion. And if your reaction was disproportionate to the ending of the relationship, then that's an indication that you were trauma bonded. When the relationship ended, the bond was so strong and the emotions so painful that you looked at ways of getting back to the beginning of the relationship where you were receiving those hits of hormones, that drug, that cocktail, and you're now addicted to this feeling. And I said in a previous video, oxytocin is actually two-faced. As well as creating bonds, researchers have discovered that actually strengthens traumatic memory. It increases fear and anxiety. If you experience a negative or stressful event or situation, oxytocin activates a part of your brain and it intensifies that memory, which then can lead on to stressful triggers. You end up reliving the emotions of the original wound. So for example, say as a small child, you got lost in a large crowd and you couldn't find your way out. You might have felt anxious and abandoned by your parents or your caregivers. This is your original wound. In that stressful situation, oxytocin goes on to strengthen that emotion. Later you experience something very similar, and it's the emotion from the original wound that's been intensified. You might not recall the original event because you're actually dealing with the situation that you're in. However, you might find that your reaction, the way you deal with something, is a similar age to when you received the wounding, the first original wounding. And this is why I call it the original wound. So if you find yourself dealing with a situation like you're a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, that indicates that the wounding came from a younger age. It's the emotional investment that I'm talking about in these relationships that make it so hard. It's easy for them to walk away because there was no investment whatsoever. You might be still attached to that feeling that you were the only person that really understood them. It makes no sense then when they walk away. They've given that title to somebody else. You're stuck trying to make sense of what's happening, and you're stuck at the end of this relationship, trauma bonded to them. You believed them, much like the character that they were playing, the mask they were wearing. They tricked you. You did see that, you saw the red flags, but you chose to ignore them. They justified their behaviour. They blamed you. They blame shifted. On some level, you knew you should have walked away. You gave them the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps you saw that damaged inner child and you thought you could help them. You thought you could save them. After all, you were the only person that ever understood them. So when you're being trauma bonded, you don't see this behaviour as abuse. And on some level, you've experienced this before. So this behaviour was familiar to you. And also they put a lot of effort into getting you to trust them. So the devaluation and discard, once they've drained you of everything, is their payback. These aren't unconditional relationships. Taking responsibility for the role you played in this relationship is a stepping stone to your healing journey. Breaking ties with them is going to give you the space you need to heal, but it's also going to be very painful. You will be like that junkie looking for its fix. Although your drug is the hormone hits you got from the attention, whether it was negative or positive from them. If you're able to see this and you're able to work through that period, you'll be able to break it. I talk a lot about getting out of your head and staying in your body, about grounding. These cravings hit you out of nowhere and they're paralysing. The thoughts that run through your anaesthetised brain are the words that you've heard. This is all your fault. These relationships are safe to you because somewhere else in your life you've experienced this before. You might have heard that you don't deserve. You might have been the scapegoat in the family. So when you get this craving for attention, when you get this need for those hormone hits, you can breathe through it. Your thoughts will ruminate and you will belittle yourself as you have done in other relationships. You will justify this all being your fault because you were told it was in this relationship as you have in others. This is different from taking responsibility for your own healing. Take your focus through your breath from the top of your head to just below your navel, to your sacral, and breathe or feel the breath going through your body down to that point. And then ask yourself if this is true. Much like watching the videos and understanding and believing this is all your fault, and then seeing the behaviour and other people describing this behaviour and realising if this wasn't all your fault. You can now ask the question, is this your fault? You can ask yourself, is this true? Try counting backwards from 5 through to 1. It is your responsibility to heal your wounds. And I hope at some point you will see this as a gift. And I appreciate you probably don't at the moment. But one day I hope you will. So in this video I wanted to talk about the effect it has on your brain and the damage it can cause, and about taking responsibility for your own healing. You can find out more about trauma bonds and the words that you hear on your journey, and some exercises at the back to start that process. I'm sending you loads and loads of love. If you can like and share the video, I'd much appreciate that. Let's help everybody get through this. Let everybody understand the role they played, but also take responsibility for the healing, the next part of this journey. Sending you loads and loads of love. Through my own healing journey, I know the damage emotional abuse leaves on you physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially. This was a game and I didn't have the rules. I was a shell of my former self. I'd lost everything. I was broke and I was broken. I, like many people, have been hurt by a toxic or an emotionally abusive person. Sarah, a coach and writer, said, "So informative and completely on point. I wish I had this book when I was recovering from an abusive relationship." I'm extremely thankful to be out on the other side now. But for anyone still suffering, healing, or dealing with trauma, this book will help you understand what is going on. Beautifully written by Liz, who is amazing at the work she does. And reading this book feels just like she knows you.